Welkom allemaal, welkom bij onze eerste webinar, videopodcast van onze serie Waar het is gebeurd of waar het gebeurt met Altix. En we hebben deze webinar gelanceerd. Wij vanuit Altix maken het investeren in private equity toegankelijk. Nou, daar zal Sesco straks wat over vertellen. En een van de dingen waar we veel vragen over krijgen is dat toch private equity ergens een best wel lastig te begrijpen markt is. En wat we met deze webinarserie willen doen is een aantal concepten, strategieën, alles omtrent private equity eigenlijk te ontrafelen met experts om de wereld, in de wereld van private equity, van ondernemers tot investeerders, tot alles daaromheen. En die nodigen we uit en daar gaan we leuke thema's mee bespreken vandaag. En voordat we daarin gaan, want we hebben vandaag een hele leuke spreker op het programma, eerst even een introductie denk ik van onszelf. Mijn naam is Melvin. Van Altix. Mijn achtergrond, ik ben ooit begonnen bij Rabobank op de overname adviesafdeling. Adviseerde ik veelal ondernemers, maar ook private equity fondsen bij de aan- en verkoop van hun bedrijven. En maak je geen zorgen, we gaan straks heel veel hebben over wat private equity is. Dus maak je geen zorgen als je het aan het begin nog niet helemaal volgt. Maar gaan we vervolgens, na mijn Rabobank carrière, ben ik bij Strikwerda aan de gang gegaan. Een private equity fonds. Waar een private equity fonds typisch kapitaal haalt bij heel veel investeerders. 100 miljoen bij pensioenfondsen, hele rijke individuen. Heb je in uiterste gevallen één familie die een eigen private equity fonds heeft. En voor zo'n familie heb ik gewerkt. Bedrijven gekocht in het MKB. En vervolgens 2 jaar geleden samen met Sesco en een team met Altix gestart. En ik denk leuk Sesco misschien als jij het woord wil overnemen van hier om iets te vertellen over het jezelf, maar ook het oprichtingsverhaal van Altix.
Ja, tuurlijk. Nou, leuk dat we dit gaan doen. We hebben al een webinar georganiseerd, Melvin. Dat is inmiddels wel een jaartje geleden. Dus ik hoop dat we nu iets meer regelmaat en tempo erin kunnen houden. Maar ik denk een hartstikke leuke manier om een heel uiteenlopend publiek. We hebben echt heel veel verschillende type aanmeldingen van mensen die veel van private equity weten tot studenten. Wat we kunnen vertellen over private equity, onze ervaringen met de markt. En gelukkig ook wat mensen die met ons mee willen denken en vertellen. Ik denk dat we vandaag iets leuks hebben staan, maar misschien te beginnen even bij mezelf, Sesco van der Vliet dus. Voor sommigen van jullie bekend, ik ben een van de oprichters van Altix. Eigenlijk samen met Tom, mijn oud-collega van Gate Invest en Private Equity Fonds, maar ook met Melvin, Carlijn, Jaap. En inmiddels zijn we met 10 man zijn we bezig om Altix in de markt te zetten. En wat we doen met Altix, zoals jullie bekend hebben, wij proberen eigenlijk particuliere investeerders te helpen met het investeren in de private equity markt. Een markt, zoals jullie weten, die eigenlijk tot voor kort heel slecht toegankelijk is geweest voor particuliere investeerders. En dat heeft een aantal redenen. Ik denk de belangrijkste reden is als jij in een private equity fonds wilt investeren, dan zijn die financiële drempels natuurlijk enorm. Dus je moet enorme bedragen meenemen om direct in een fonds te kunnen, laten staan in meerdere fondsen tegelijkertijd. Maar het is ook een markt die van oudsher de afgelopen decennia best wel afgesloten is, best wel intransparant, moeilijk toegang te krijgen als je geen netwerk hebt, als je niet weet welke fondsen open zijn, welke fondsen in de markt. En als je dan al toegang hebt, financieel en qua netwerk, dan is het eigenlijk ook heel moeilijk om wat zinnigs te zeggen over die fondsen. Welke fondsen moet je nou niet in investeren en welke fondsen wel? Nou, dat zijn allerlei zaken waar we met Altix mee helpen. Mijn eigen achtergrond ligt ook in private equity. Ik ben begonnen ooit bij een bank. Daar adviseerde ik veel private equity fondsen bij de aan- en verkoop van hun bedrijven. En vervolgens ben ik bij een private equity fonds gaan werken. Gate Invest, ik zei het zojuist al. Daar heb ik ook eigenlijk voor een rijke familie geïnvesteerd in private, niet beursgenoteerde bedrijven, wat private equity doet. En dat heb ik zo'n 7 jaar gedaan en in die periode is het idee voor Altix ontstaan. En ik denk het is een beetje tweeledig. Aan de ene kant zagen wij natuurlijk een soort van bredere trend in private equity dat er meer en meer particulier geld toegang zocht tot de private equity markt. In ons eigen netwerk, bijvoorbeeld heel veel ondernemers in ons eigen netwerk die steeds vaker vroegen van private equity, ik hoor het meer, ik zie het meer, die markt is groeiende, wat gebeurt daar en kan ik niet een stukje van mijn vermogen ook in private equity investeren? En Sesco, jij werkt in die markt, dus kan je me daar niet mee helpen? Nou, die vraag kregen we vaker en vaker. En aan de andere kant zien we in die private equity markt waar we jarenlang hebben gewerkt, dat daar enorme hoeveelheid aan hele mooie bedrijven zijn. Private bedrijven, oftewel niet op de beurs genoteerd. Dus voor de normale belegger eigenlijk niet beschikbaar. Terwijl dat nou juist bedrijven zijn waar ontzettend veel gebeurt. Hè? Investeren in bedrijven waar het gebeurt. Ook de titel van deze webinarserie. Dat is eigenlijk waar het om gaat. Het is geen willekeurige set van private bedrijven. Het zijn bedrijven waar een private equity fonds op dat moment iets ziet gebeuren. Dat kan zijn internationalisatie. Het kan zijn buy-and-build overnames, waar we het vandaag over hebben. Het kan zijn een bepaald digitaliseringstraject. Maar ergens een bepaald thema waar een private equity fonds denkt wat van af te weten. En op die manier probeert met een investering waarde te creëren. Nou, die twee elementen kwamen samen voor ons in het idee van Altix. En zo zijn we het nu 2 jaar geleden gestart. Gelukkig gaat dat heel erg goed. Ons verhaal is denk ik vooral gefocust op met kennis van zaken. We zijn allemaal oud private equity mensen. Toegang creëren op een hele transparante, eenvoudige, digitale manier. In een gespreide set van private equity fondsen die wij selecteren voor onze klanten. Inmiddels zitten we op 100 miljoen euro aan vermogen onder beheer. Ietsjes meer, verdeeld over 300 verschillende investeerders. En zijn we eigenlijk met onze missie om die private equity markt open te breken echt goed onderweg. En vandaag denk ik ons webinar een mooie stap om daar weer wat meer over te gaan vertellen.
Ja, leuk. En vandaag onze eerste spreker. En het eerste thema is buy and build. Ook een best wel Engelse term. En Sesco begon al gelijk over private equity en alles. Maar voor diegenen die niet weten, helemaal op blanco komen. Private equity, wat is dat? Private equity, letterlijk privaat kapitaal, is het investeren in niet beursgenoteerde ondernemingen. En iedereen kent de Shells van deze wereld, maar de tienduizenden niet beursgenoteerde ondernemingen, wat een markt wat vele malen groter is. Het is gewoon een veel grotere markt. En als we het hebben over private equity, hebben we het over investeren in dat stuk. In de bedrijven die je misschien wel kent, zoals Action, Q-Park, maar je hebt ook hele kleine bedrijven en alles daartussen. En het leuke aan private equity is dat ze kiezen bedrijven waar ze in investeren die potentie hebben. En vaak investeren, dat weten mensen niet, samen met de ondernemers die echt experts zijn op die bedrijven. En private equity die voegt ook zelf actief waarde toe. Het is niet alleen kopen en kijken, maar het is echt actief waarde toevoegen. En dat zijn vaak thema's waar de ondernemer niet superveel ervaring mee heeft. Die heel experts in zijn of haar eigen bedrijf. Maar bepaalde dingen zoals digitalisering, naar het buitenland gaan. Dat zijn thema's waar private equity vaak heel veel verstand van heeft, omdat het over meerdere bedrijven toepasbaar kan zijn, maar een ondernemer vaak maar 1 of 2 keer doet in zijn of haar leven. Dus een van de dingen waar private equity echt expert in is, en vaak echt waarde toevoegt, is buy and build. En buy and build, het bouwen van bedrijven, is het doen van overnames om je bedrijf te laten groeien. En dat kan zijn om grotere, of om bepaalde services toe te voegen die je eerst niet had, of een eerste stap in het buitenland te zijn. Er kunnen honderden dingen zijn, maar er is typisch iets waar private equity heel erg goed in is. En best wel leuk, Sesco, jij hebt natuurlijk ook een achtergrond in private equity. Je hebt veel te maken gehad met dat buy and build concept. Wat is bijvoorbeeld jouw ervaring met buy and build?
Ja, kijk, buy and build. Ik denk consolidatiestrategieën, overnames van andere bedrijven om toe te voegen aan je platform is denk ik een van de meest gebruikte waardecreatiestrategieën die private equity fondsen uitvoeren. Het is ook kennis die ze veel hebben. Er zitten veel, vaak oud-bankiers, overnamespecialisten, mensen met financiële, juridische, fiscale kennis. Hoe je nou precies een overname in binnen- en buitenland structureert. Iets wat Melvin al zei, wat een ondernemer vaak wat minder snel in huis heeft. En het is een manier om snel te groeien, om bepaalde producten, technologieën, innovaties, nieuwe landen toe te voegen aan wat je nog niet hebt. In plaats van dat je dat allemaal zelf moet gaan uitbouwen.
Ja. En je hoort best wel leuk. Je hoort natuurlijk heel veel verhalen over buy and build. En dat ben ik ook. Kijk, we hebben straks Axcel op de webinar. Axcel is een van de grootste Scandinavische private equity fondsen. In Nederland nog niet super bekend. Maar Scandinavië echt een begrip. En wereldwijd bekend om hoe zij omgaan met de buy and build strategie. Zij hebben honderden bedrijven overgenomen op die manier. En staan er echt onbekend. En best wel benieuwd ook in hun visie te horen. Maar wat je ook veel ziet over de laatste jaren is dat je koopt in principe bedrijven om je bedrijf meer producten, meer services naar het buitenland te gaan. Maar dat je ook heel veel ziet dat over de afgelopen jaren bedrijven hebben gekocht om een groter bedrijf te maken wat dan op papier meer waard lijkt. Dat is ook een van de dingen die wij vaak tegenkomen ook in ons boekonderzoek. Dat je kijkt van het is eigenlijk een samenraapsel van niet samenhangende bedrijven.
Ja, dat zie je inderdaad veel voorkomen. Kijk, wat er gebeurt, en is het risico dat het misschien iets te technisch wordt, is maar dat er... kijk, op een moment dat je... Op zich is de logica van een buy and build makkelijk. Hè? Dus je voegt nieuwe zaken toe. Je spreidt ook over meer klanten, meer landen, meer mensen. Dus er is minder afhankelijkheid. Dus automatisch is je bedrijf waardevoller. Nou, de waarde van een bedrijf wordt vaak uitgedrukt in een multiple over de winst. Hè? In technische termen is dat de EBITDA-multiple. En over het algemeen een kleiner...
Dus multiple bedoel je dan aantal maal de winst. Dus
een factor.
Vastgoedpand, 10 keer de huur betaalt, betaal je hier 10 keer
Precies, betaal je voor een softwarebedrijf misschien veel meer keer de winst. 12, 13 keer de winst. Voor een wat kleiner industrieel bedrijf misschien 6, 7 keer de winst. Maar het is een factor van de winst. En over het algemeen betaal je voor kleinere bedrijven een lagere factor. Want de afhankelijkheid van de ondernemer of één specifieke klant is groter. Dus met een buy and build kan je veel bedrijven voor een relatief lage multiple kopen. En als je dat dan samenvoegt, is het een groter, internationaal gediversifieerd geheel. En is automatisch die multiple hoger. Nou, dat heet multiple arbitrage. En dat is een veel gebruikte waardecreatiestrategie in private equity. Alleen wat je wel hebt zien gebeuren, zeker in de laatste 10 jaar, toen de rente zo ongelooflijk laag was het natuurlijk heel goedkoop om geld te lenen om die overnames te financieren. Zijn er veel van dit soort buy-and-build verhalen geweest, die soms wat verder gingen dan echt een goede rationaal waarom bepaalde bedrijven samengevoegd moeten worden, om alleen maar te komen tot een bepaalde omvang, wat dan weer interessant zou kunnen zijn voor internationale kopers. En dat is iets, wat jij net ook zegt, wat wij veel zien, of veel hebben gezien bij private equity fondsen, waar naar kijken van, in de afgelopen 10 jaar, wat is nou precies de rationaal en de thematiek geweest van een bepaalde buy-and-build? En is dat meer geweest dan alleen maar kopen om het kopen, maar is dat ook daadwerkelijk een goed, waardevol, stabiel bedrijf gebouwd?
Ja, dat komt omdat het één is, dat is het tijdgebonden. Als je de tijd mee hebt, dan kan je dat soort dingen doen. En de ander is, als je kijkt naar consistentie en consistent in elke tijd goede bedrijven bouwen. En je ziet nu dat mensen veel kritischer zijn ook op dat punt. Nou ja, ik bedoel, het is leuk, dus wij doen altijd even zo'n introotje. En ik wil ook graag nu dan even de brug slaan, want we hebben ook Axcel. En Axcel gaat wat vertellen over, wat ik zei, een groot Scandinavisch fonds. Echt expert in het gebied van private equity. We hebben Björn en Jesper hiervan uitgenodigd, een van de leidinggevenden daar. En die gaan we een beetje sparren over hoe zij ernaar kijken. Dus ik wil ook hun graag even bij de webinar even uitnodigen.
Yes, so welcome to Axcel, namely Björn and Jesper, who now joined our webinar, Waar het gebeurt. Björn and Jesper, that means where it happens. That's the title of our webinar series. Our very first edition, so really cool that you guys have found the time to come and join us and tell us a little bit more about Axcel and especially your buy and build strategy. So before we dive in, I think our listeners would like to hear who's actually on the call. So maybe you can give a very brief introduction on yourselves.
Yeah, would you like to start, Jesper?
Yes, please. I can do that. So I'm Jesper Breitenstein, Head of Investor Relations here at Axcel, joined in 2015. So been with the firm now for 9 years. Been part of the team raising our 3 latest funds. So we have raised a bit more than 2 billion euros over the last funds. And on top of that, also raised some 500 million euros in a very active co-investment program.
Good, thank you. And Björn?
Yes, so my name is Björn Larsson. I'm a partner at Axcel based in Stockholm. Been working soon 20 years in the private equity environment in various roles. Started out in advisory, also worked full-time in restructuring during the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009. Then joined a global private equity firm focused on SMEs. Felt I want to get...
What are SMEs?
Small and mid-sized enterprises.
Okay, yeah.
And then wanted to get more of an entrepreneurial exposure, so joined a buy and build company owned by Nordic Capital at the time called Annecura, which was a buy and build in the veterinary clinic space. Spent about 5 years there, and after quite a successful exit, I joined Axcel as a partner 5 years ago. And here I've been involved in 6 of our transactions and leading 3 of those.
So you started out in advisory, Björn.
Yes, that's correct.
And why did you move to the private equity to have the more entrepreneurial side? Is that?
Yeah, originally I was really enjoying myself being on the advisory side, but I just wanted to kind of be I guess, be more of a decision maker than an advisor to some extent, right? Really be able to both make decisions and really to see things through. As an advisor, you kind of typically seeing one aspect of the whole journey, from an entry to an exit, from when we make an investment until we exit that investment. But being on this side of the table, I get to be part of both making or not making that investment decision, and then also seeing everything through, right, including working with management and hopefully realizing a good return with an exit.
And Björn, maybe for our viewers or listeners to get a little bit more of an understanding who you Jesper really are, is as we asked, one question is, if there's a person or a company that really inspires you, who would you name?
Yeah, no, good question. I guess I get more inspired kind of by journeys that people or companies do, more so than the specific individuals. And in particular, kind of, if you've seen investors being able to perform at the highest level with a certain level of consistency, of course, that's quite inspiring, right? Even though that may not be always relevant for us. If you take a person like Warren Buffett, just to make an obvious example, right? And of course, that can go up and down. But if you delivered those kind of returns for that long time period, then you're obviously doing something right, and you're following certain principles that make sense.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, maybe besides you personally, let's talk a little bit about Axcel, of course. One of the funds that we, with Altix, selected for one of our private equity portfolios last year, your seventh fund, Axcel, you raised, I think, 1.3 billion at the hard cap, which means there was more interest than initially anticipated. So a very good sign, I think, with what you guys are doing there in the Nordics. Could you tell us a little bit more briefly on Axcel and what you stand for?
Happy to. So just taking a step back, we've been around for 30 years. So we've been doing this now for 3 decades. Celebrated our 30th year anniversary this year, actually. We're currently investing at our 7th fund. And the fact that we're investing after our 7th fund typically means that we've been doing something pretty good in our first 6 funds. Otherwise, we would not get the trust from our investors to continue to invest their money. So we're really happy about that, obviously. We invest out of 3 offices, Copenhagen, Stockholm, and since a couple of weeks back, actually, Frankfurt. So covering Northern Europe by way of the Nordics, where we've been active for the last 30 years. And then since what I just mentioned, since a couple of weeks back, also German-speaking Europe, which I think is really exciting.
And just maybe very briefly on that, I mean, you've had experience for 30 years in the Nordics market. Now you venture out to Germany. Why and why Germany? Why not, for instance, Holland, maybe?
Yeah, good question. And I think it really was between Holland and Germany to some extent, right, in terms of attractiveness of markets. And I think there's a lot of similarities, in particular cultural similarities between the Nordic cultures and the Netherlands. And I've spent a lot of time in the Netherlands myself over the years and really enjoy myself there. I think at the end of the day, Germany is the largest export market for all of the Nordic countries and Sweden and Denmark in particular. And we can see that for many of our own portfolio companies, Germany is the first natural step outside of the Nordics. So this is really about both increasing our own addressable market from an Axcel point of view, but also being able to support our portfolio companies in an even better way. With that, just because Germany was the first country outside of the Nordics doesn't mean that we'll never be in the Netherlands. That's it.
Yeah, so it's not only about acquiring new German companies, but also expanding your current Nordic companies into Germany by way of, for instance, buy and build.
Yeah. Yes, for instance.
Yeah, that's clear.
And maybe on Axcel itself, you're a Scandinavian private equity company, but in terms of strategy, I think your core sentence or your the key sentence on the front of your every presentation is creating lasting transformations. How does that compare to what a regular private equity does, right? What is your differentiated approach? What do you do actually?
Yeah, good question. So I think something that we do really, really well is that we're quite entrepreneurial. And I would dare to say that we're more entrepreneurial than most.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be seen, for instance, in how we approach buy and build, which is, of course, a theme during today's conversation. And by way of example, right, we, for instance, in the last year, we put together a new group within accounting, audit, and advisory services, where we originally combined 11 companies into one new platform that we have continued to build upon, establishing a really strong management team, where we act as a catalyst of getting this off the traps, and then for the management team really to take over and build something which is built to last, creating lasting transformations.
And you mentioned entrepreneurial, right? You have private equity funds who buy from other private equity funds quite a lot. And I think you focus more on building together with founders or entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, exactly. So more than 60% of what we do is entirely proprietary. What that means is that we invest together with management teams, and directly from the management teams and from the founders. And then actually even 80% of what we do is on an exclusive basis. So that's really important for us to create those type of relationships. And going back to your question about differentiation, in addition to being entrepreneurial, I think we have those relationships where we can make those, where we can create those situations. And then typically what that means in investment size, that's an enterprise value, so a company value on a debt and cash-free basis of between 50 and 500 million euros, roughly.
I think one of the questions we like that, right? So you have private equity funds, you have 4 markets that you really focus on, right? And you have private equity funds that find the market or the subset in the market more important, or private equity funds that really rely on management team, right? If you have to pick one of the two, right? Have a great company in a great market with a subpar management or founder team, or the other way around.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's an interesting question. So, and you have to choose, but it can be either a very good management team who can adapt to any market circumstance, or a very attractive market with a subpar management team. What would you choose?
Yeah, I think overall, if you look at the companies which we own, so to speak, and what we see making the biggest difference is the strength of the management teams. So, and that's why we always make sure, and that's of course part of one of our most important tasks, is to ensure that we have the strongest management teams in place.
To be honest, so we worked on the private equity side as well, where now we're running our own business. And one of the things we've learned is that you need a good market, obviously, but at the end of the day, it's all about execution, because ideas can be replicated, market can be mirrored, but at the end of the day, it's execution, right? So I think I would agree. With,
and I would also say that we try to combine both, right? Having to choose, and I guess
ideally
in this case I had to choose, but ideally we like to find attractive markets with strong companies that are led by exceptional management teams. Then that's where you get the real returns.
And then maybe moving a bit to the subject, I guess, of today, right? We're talking about buy and build, right? And we've invited you guys because we know from our works, our work when we selected you, that buy and build is one or maybe the core strength of yours. So maybe starting with a brief introduction, when you think of buy and build, what does that mean for Axcel, right?
I think it's twofold for us. One is obviously to find a platform and then make some bolt-ons in a smaller scale. That could be 2, 3, 4 investments added to that, so we can expand into a new market or geography or product area. The other one, I guess, is probably where we'll dive more in today, is where we put together a bit more and create the platform ourselves by combining multiple companies. By this, we can craft our own deals and be less dependent on the activity in the market, but also make sure that we get highly engaged companies and management team on the umbrella and start from there. So a huge competitive advantage starting there, but of course will also require much more time.
Well, more and more in your portfolio are now kind of building these groups of smaller companies into the platform. I mean, I think that's a very interesting kind of move. It's a pretty unique move as well. I mean, we see hundreds of private equity funds in Europe, to be honest, and there are a few of the funds who are doing this, but not a whole lot. It brings a lot of complexity, but also a lot of opportunity, of course. I mean, What do you see, Björn, as the key benefits and challenges, and how do you cope with those challenges and those complexities?
Yeah, so good question. And as you mentioned, right, I think we like buy and build. We think this, and we particularly like buy and build in attractive businesses whereby we can combine organic growth, so like for like growth, with acquisitions. And the buy and build cases can look quite different, as Jesper alluded to, right? It can be those where we make a few more strategic transformational add-ons, and it can be those that I think you're alluding to now, where we do a lot, quite often, a little bit more decentralized businesses with local markets. I think the benefits here really is that, in particular in those cases where we build this from scratch, is that we are then able to handpick each asset, each business that we would like to belong to this new group, and we can also handpick the management team. So I was talking about one case before, right, where a group partners, which we then put together by combining or by making the first acquisition of 11 companies, which were all signed and closed at the same day, and that we continue to build on from then. And of course, right, when you invest in 11 companies at the same day, and you need to run 11 processes in parallel, of course that requires a lot of execution power, and it requires quite a lot of know-how to get that right. But I think we have consistently shown that we're able to do that. And just recently we closed another one of those transactions where we invested in 15 companies as an initial platform in the property well-being services called Utilitas. So 2 companies just in the last year actually that we've created in that way.
But when you think about it, acquiring one company with one selling shareholder whose baby you're buying, right, is already a challenge. But 15 at the same time, I know from not really experience, but I can imagine that it's a huge challenge, and takes also a lot of effort from your team, right, doing that. But how do you align 15 selling shareholders, or probably even more at the same time?
Yeah, you're right. And typically that would not be 15. The number of selling shareholders would be about 30, right, typically. And to begin with, I think these are not projects that takes a couple of weeks or even a couple of months, right? Typically they take more than a year. And it starts out with an investment hypothesis, whereby we identify what we believe is an attractive market. We then deep dive into looking at, are there interesting opportunities for us to invest in existing platforms, for instance, which are built along the same principles according to which we want to build companies. And if that exists, if those type of platforms exist, then it makes sense for us to invest in existing platforms, right? And sometimes they exist and sometimes they do not. In these 2 examples I just described, it did not really exist in the way we would like these groups to look like, right? And then we start to meet entrepreneurs and test our hypothesis to see if there's an interest also for them to build a group in the way we see in front of us. And then according to the principles we believe in. And then that is typically a period of at least 6 months, right? Where we meet each company, obviously, a number of times. And in the beginning, it's more exploratory. And over time, you get deeper and deeper into the content and valuation, etc., etc. And then at the end of the day, you just need to invest the time and effort in those. And yes, you're right that, of course, doing 10 or 15 companies at the same time requires more time and effort than one company. But I think we have also found a way to ensure that we focus on what really matters, and to do these processes in a way with quite a high productivity simply from the people involved. And we also typically work with, I think, larger deal teams in those cases than elsewhere. So it requires a higher engagement and investment in terms of team and hours from our point of view, but also with, I would say, a higher potential return, and also actually higher transaction certainty once we have tested that the appetite is there in the various markets.
Yeah, and the higher potential for return is that because you add a lot of value, and in working through that complexity and bringing together all those companies, you probably pay a little less for the individual companies.
Yeah, generally, of course, a larger company is more worth than a smaller company.
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say. But also, I would say that the companies that we are building become more worth because, again, we're handpicking the best companies, the upper quartile companies in each industry, and then we're handpicking the managers to run those companies. And the combination of that, in particular in attractive markets, become quite powerful.
That's interesting. And so with handpicking the managers, do you then mean the managers or the founders at those companies that you handpick, okay, these are going to be the leaders of this platform, or do you hire externally for these kind of groups?
Yeah, it's a good question. So both actually, right? Because the entrepreneurs and the leaders, what we would like to see is that the entrepreneurs and the leaders in the businesses that we invest in, that they remain in the business and they continue to build the business. So of course, by handpicking the best businesses, we also, in a sense, handpick the best leaders of those businesses. But we also then, of course, want to ensure that 1 + 1 is greater than 2. And in order to do that, we also need to have a team that supports those businesses and ensures that, for instance, you either achieve better procurement terms or cross sales across these companies, etc. Right? And for that, you also need to have a central management team. And here it's really important that we handpick the best people to run that management team, and that can then create strong relationships with the businesses in this.
Mm-hmm. And I can imagine that. So your first step is combining 15. I use the 15 because it's a large number. But the second step is how to move from there, right? You now have 15 companies, right? Not integrate or not combined. There are 15 separate companies before you guys came along. How do you go about from that point? And what are the biggest, I guess, challenges or pitfalls you've seen happening or have experienced yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one thing that you should start with is that there's not one operational model that's right in every single situation, right? I think a lot of the secret sauce, a lot of kind of the know-how that we bring to the table is to be able to identify the right operational model in each situation at a given point in time. So I think, because I think a lot of the pitfalls that you can go into is that you pick or you choose the wrong operating model, for instance, right? So let's say in a market where a local market with local relationships to customers, suppliers, all the market's participants, you create a too centralized model by having someone sitting in a completely different country micromanaging what's happening in these local businesses without really having the sense for what's going on in those markets, right? But conversely, you can also be in a situation whereby you invest in businesses that should be heavily integrated because it simply makes sense, right? And then you don't take that into consideration and you don't invest enough time and effort to do that and really create 1 + 1 is greater than 2. And we invest in different situations, right? So for us, it's really being able to decipher, okay, what makes sense in each situation. And that can, of course, also develop over time as a company kind of grows through an S-curve of maturity to some extent, right? So I think those are some of the key decisions that we are having internally, as well as in our investment committee, as to what makes sense and how do we address each situation.
And maybe talking about a real life example, right? One of the case studies you talk about, because it's all nice in theory, but how does it work in practice, right? Walk us through one of your maybe proudest transformations, lasting transformation, but also one that has experienced some challenges, right?
Yeah, no, happy to. And if I just start with one that kind of maybe exemplifies a good illustration of a business where more of a decentralized approach makes sense. We're currently building a veterinary group called Vetopia, which is a leader in veterinary care in Northern Europe. It has approximately 180 clinics with 300 million euros in revenue. This was a company which we started with initial investments in Denmark and Norway into existing local groups that were independent leaders with by then roughly 30 clinics, so from 30 clinics to 180 clinics. And what's a bit specific about veterinary care is that where the service is being provided is, of course, defined to some extent by the four walls of that building, right? So if you, for instance, have a pet in Utrecht that is sick, you will not travel to Helsinki with that pet, right? You will try to seek help as close to you as possible, and that quite local markets. And also the veterinarians, the nurses, and the assistants in the clinics, they would also typically work quite close to where they live, right? They will also not travel to London then to provide veterinary care if they live in Amsterdam, for instance. So the markets become very, very local, and all the know-how, so to speak, sits within each clinic. So it's an environment where the vets and the clinic leaders should take 99% plus of all local decisions, close to the patients, close to the employees, and close to the customers. And it would be foolish of us to sit in Stockholm and Copenhagen and to believe that we can take those decisions better than these highly skilled professionals can do. So in such a scenario, right, you need to empower and provide the local clinic leaders and the vets and the nurses with the mandates to run their clinic in the way that they see fit best in that local market. With that said, you still need to ensure that we bring something to the table, right? And that could, for instance, be that you create interest groups across certain disciplines of knowledge. For instance, the orthopedics can learn from each other. Maybe you have one or two skilled orthopedic surgeons in one clinic, but across 180 clinics, suddenly you have a community where people can learn from each other. It could also be a situation, for instance, where you go together and you create better procurement terms so that you can buy supplies, which you did yesterday, but at significantly better prices today, because you simply grow stronger together. So what we need to do then is that we need to invest money and resources of finding the best support teams in order to support these clinics in the best possible way. And in this market, and sorry to be a bit long-winded here, but in this market, we believe that is best done in each country, close to the clinics where you can provide the right level of support in a native language and with a large familiarity with each local market's characteristics. So that's an example of where we think that makes sense, right?
Yeah, and relating that to buy and build, right? So in this case, would you let, I know their veterinaries are not buy and build M&A experts, or right? But in terms of letting them lead the target, which you want to acquire, is that more than decentralized as well, I guess, in this case?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think we would never invest in a veterinary clinic where other veterinarians in the group cannot say that this is a strong veterinary clinic. These are strong people in and behind this clinic, for instance. So from that perspective, they are certainly involved and very important for this process. When it comes to the actual craft of doing M&A, here we think that makes sense to have specialized people who do that as a profession. Also because we want our vets to be vets, right? And they want to be vets. So that's why we try to have the best possible person in each place, of course.
All right. Yeah, and maybe so that's interesting. I mean, you talk a lot about integration, decentralized versus centralized, and for every different company and strategy, I think you need to have a different approach. But in general terms, again, if we put another dilemma for you, I mean, if you would have to choose between in the 5-year kind of holding period that you are the co-owner of a company, if it would be keep acquiring, just keep buying, or focus on integration, you have to choose one of those. What would it be?
Yeah, I think that's a question which is not possible to answer actually, because I think neither of them are interesting to some extent, right? I think what's interesting here is that when we create 1 + 1, which is greater than 2, And then when it comes to integration, right, you have different levels of integration in different aspects of the business. So if we take another example, we used to own a web hosting company called Lupia, which and here a completely different approach towards integration made sense, with an integrated tech stack, integrated databases, etc. Right, which is very different to veterinary clinics, which are then having all the services behind the 4 physical walls, right? And that, so to get to your question, the level of integration does not, of course, mean that it becomes a binary yes or no question to that answer, but rather that the higher the integration level, or the more integration you need to do, the slower M&A pace you will need to have, because you will simply not be able to cope otherwise. When it comes to businesses that for various reasons should not be as deeply integrated, then of course you can keep a higher pace. But that all rests on the assumption that you buy the best businesses. Because if you don't buy the best businesses, then in my mind, you shouldn't buy any businesses at all, right? Then it's better to sit with what you have. So you should never do acquisitions just for the sake of doing acquisitions.
No, but I think I mean that has been done. I think in the last, I don't know, 8 to 10 years, there have been examples of buy and build stories that were, well, more focused on buy than build, sort of say. And now I think you also, you acquire companies, you build this platform. In the end, you have to sell it at the end of the fund. Of course, you're always working towards an exit strategy. And you see that your buyers, the international buyers, are looking differently, I think, at buy and build platforms than what they used to do, and they're more focused on how is the company integrated, being it decentralized or fully centralized, but how is it integrated, and how do you kind of work that integration into your teams? Do you have separate teams for that? Is that in the private equity team of Axcel, or is it with the management of the companies? How do you look at integration?
Yeah, so we usually create both an M&A blueprint that becomes kind of the guiding principles for how we do M&A, and we also create an integration blueprint that becomes the guiding principles for how we do integration. And these are kind of not optional principles that you may choose or not choose to follow, right? These are governing principles that needs to be followed. And then they will look slightly different from one case to the other, right? Because again, we are developing bespoke solutions for each individual business. Because if you try to create kind of a one size fits all, you have created a one size fits no one.
And maybe before we move on to the last subject, so what's maybe one short example from when things didn't go as you guys wanted to, and how did you go about it? How did you fix it, right? Just a real life example, something happened or something didn't pan out, entrepreneurs who didn't want to cooperate, or businesses that didn't work, or any particular thing you want to share, and how you go about that.
I think overall, the way to avoid that, right, is to avoid what you described before, which is to create buy and builds just for the sake of buying and not build. And we saw that in particular during the COVID boom, right? Where also I think the overall kind of financial market were not critical enough, perhaps in some cases, right? I think the market has really sobered up from that. And now the businesses are really need to be built to last in order for investors to see the full value potential. And I would say that the most important aspect of that is to create strong organic performance. You talked about integration, which is of course important, but at the end of the day, if you buy businesses to create a larger group, each business needs to contribute. And each business needs to be stronger tomorrow than it was today. If they're not, well, then you have created a pyramid which will not hold, right? So focusing on the organic performance, I think it can be easy to become a little bit too excited about the M&A opportunities and not having enough discipline on organic performance. So that's something we always discuss, both in our investment committee and as well as our operating committee, the importance of sticking to that organic performance focus.
Yeah, fully agree. And then maybe move on to the next subject. But for us also, when we look at funds in our selection process, the numbers are somewhat blurry sometimes. A lot of acquisitions, so a lot of growth, but really digging into that organic growth piece. Kind of that should be the rationale for buy and build, right? Together we're stronger than as an individual company. That's a very important one for us as well.
No, exactly. I mean, it only makes sense if these businesses become stronger together, and each business become better tomorrow than it was yesterday, right? Otherwise, the buy and build does not make sense. So, of course, that needs to be a fundamental principle for what we're building.
Yeah, good.
All right, then maybe moving on. So we've talked about buy and build, but maybe now on the future and private equity in general, and maybe a question for you, Jesper, right? What do you view are the biggest trends in private equity? And maybe specifically on buy and build approaches, but general value creation approaches or any other thing you can think about?
I think the market has become more and more crowded over the last maybe 10 years or so, 5-10 years. We see more and more players, and I think it's very important that, to survive and deliver top quartile returns, that you are exceptionally strong in your sourcing model, as we discussed in the beginning, where you can craft your own deals. I think it's very important that you have a distinct value creation approach. In the end, you are in control of most of the value creation. Of course, you can get some tailwind from the market, but I think the decision you take will drive the value. And I think going forward, there will be probably a bigger distance between the best performing funds and the less good performing funds. And in order to stay in top, you really need to be on top of what you're doing and have the right management team and the right approach in place.
Yeah, I think I fully agree. So, and it's quite hard to distinguish good performing funds from bad performing funds. I know it should be their returns, but over the past 10 years, you have seen every fund performing quite well, obviously partly due to macroeconomic circumstances. And for us, and that's I think we like about you, but that's the last compliment maybe for this webinar. But in terms of added value, it's all about did you foresee what was going to happen? You bought the right company with the right rationale, and did you added value, or were you just plain lucky, which could happen, right, over the past 10 years? And I think I agree with you that focusing on which funds do, like yourself, create own platforms, right, which is really hard work and is creating own value, creating your own, not necessarily, but creating your own luck in a way, right, creating your own businesses. And that's, I think, something we look quite critically at right now, and it's hard to still distinguish because returns have been great over the past 10 years in almost every fund we see.
Yeah, and I think you need to remember that at Axcel we've been in the market for 30 years. We have stayed in the mid-market, we have stayed in the Nordic, now we have expanded into Germany, but we have acquired a lot of experience in what we do over many years, and of course that help us in taking the decisions and create the return.
Yeah, and then the question, one of the biggest trends you see now is platforms like ourselves introducing retail to private equity. How do you think about platforms like Altix, and obviously a couple of more on this, introducing the retail to funds such as yourself, which normally were quite out of reach, I guess, for most of the
there's no doubt that it will be a very important source of capital for us going forward. In the past, we've had very strong support from pension funds, asset managers, foundation, and the likes. But I think in general, the high net worth segment has been underpenetrated. It's the same picture we see in all the markets we're trying to raise capital. So working together with platforms who can help that and help us penetrate that is just an extremely big help, and we also see that platforms like yourself are growing in size and becoming more and more important for funds like us.
I think also, Jesper, it creates an access to an even broader network to you guys and your investors, right? Which I think for an investor such as us, such as Axcel, is really important. I think it works both ways.
Yeah. And then we'll end with a question on that. But maybe the second to last question. So if you look at Axcel in 10, 20 years, what's the dream on your side? What do you want to build? Germany now, Holland, Europe, the world?
The world.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I think for us, we build this similar to how we build kind of our companies to last. We also build Axcel to last, right? We've been in this market for 30 years. We plan to be in this market for an additional 30 years, right? And it's a market with quite long cycles. So we think it makes sense to take each step quite carefully, and then really to execute and succeed with each step. So right now we're focusing on continuing to build on the successes that we've had in the Nordics, but also to replicate those successes in German-speaking Europe, for instance, and then to build a really strong firm that we are proud to one day live over to the next generation, right? And I think exactly what steps will come after that, I think that will follow quite naturally. But the focus right now is to achieve what's ahead of us 1 year term.
And if after this webinar, one of the people watching it, advisors, entrepreneurs, and anybody saying, well, I have the perfect Axcel deal, I like your story and I have something for you guys, but it's Dutch, right? Is that something you guys would look at, or is that something you would wait until you have the Dutch team up and running at some point?
Yeah, and a good question. So we can look at that. Kind of the main focus that we have is again the Nordics. But we have a possibility in our mandate to also look beyond the Nordics. But I would also say that in order for us to invest in the Netherlands at the current point in time, when we don't have a team in the Netherlands, obviously that needs to be very, very, very much into the core of our sweet spot and really replicating prior successes that we've had. So with that said, we do also have roughly 20 portfolio companies, right, that we have invested in that in turn are interested in add-ons in additional markets, for instance, in the Netherlands. And we much rather look at one opportunity too many than one too few. So by all means, we always appreciate input and always appreciate the discussion.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Great. So I think, at least in terms of time, I think we're there for now. I don't know if Sesko, Jesper, Björn, you have anything you want to share in this setting?
No, but thanks a lot for the discussion. Very interesting and all good questions.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, Björn, Jesper, thanks very much. That's much appreciated and very interesting to hear your views on where we're heading with Axcel, buy and build, but also the private equity market in general. So thanks for your time, and hope we speak soon.
Yeah,
likewise. Thank you very much.